Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Matt Getty, who's a partner here at the firm, a true negotiation tactician and architect. Also joining us today is our guest, Zeeshan Hafiz. Zeeshan, sometimes who goes by Z, and maybe in this podcast will do that, is currently Chief Revenue Officer at Aspire HR, and no doubt has some stories, expertise, and opinions to share. So as always, we'll keep it fun, relaxed, and casual. So, Z, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can have just a flavor of your negotiation experience. Also, maybe you can let us know at what point in your career did you discover the importance of negotiation and start to actually take it seriously. And when you're talking about your career, we want you to brag a little bit here, so please don't be shy. That's what our listeners came for. So with that, sir, I will turn it over to you, Z.
Oh, well, Matt, thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with the two Matts, or Matt Square. I'm not sure. We'll
take it. Matt G and Matt D.
Okay. So my background, actually, negotiation started very early for me. Originally, I was a lawyer. I went to law school. I went to Georgetown, and my first role out of law school was actually working at the World Trade Organization, where we were helping different countries, member nations, negotiate and resolve disputes. So for me, negotiations started from day one of my career. It was something that I was involved with in day one. My next role, actually, after I left the WTO, I came back to the U.S. I worked at a managed care company where I was involved with, I was basically chief legal officer and managed our legal work, but also worked on HR and compliance. As you can imagine, very exciting and sexy things like HR. It was definitely a different career move. But what I will say in terms of negotiation, my team was specifically responsible for negotiating the novation of contracts, which basically is the addition or sale of a health plan from a healthcare management organization. Going back to the point I made earlier about how exciting the world of HR compliance and in terms of HR and operations can be at a managed care company, I found myself looking for something different, and that's where I sort of made the pivot. I joined a startup where the CEO was working on building a product placement campaign company that basically worked on doing product placements and music videos. And he brought me on specifically for my negotiation abilities, because one of my roles was to run legal for them. And that meant creating contracts, negotiating agreements with both the brand partners as well as the artists. And then on the other side, also, the thing that really attracted me to this opportunity was I was brought in to help lead the biz dev team. So from a biz dev perspective, I was, charged to help build out a business development team to reach out to different product companies that we could then partner with to put them in different music videos. So that was actually my first time I got into sales, which was later on than most folks normally start out. But negotiations obviously was a big part of that. Now, I realized that when I started doing more of the marketing and sales stuff, that was really where my passion was. And so I decided, hey, why not do this the right way and, take myself to the next level. I decided to go get my MBA. I went to University of Virginia, Darden School, got my MBA there. I did a marketing consultancy while I was there with DuPont, but realized, my passion is in sales. So I went to go work at Microsoft. That was my first role outside of business school. At Microsoft, I joined when 2015. So that's early on in the cloud revolution. So Microsoft Azure at that time, negotiating some very large deals with customers like AT&T, 7-Eleven, Brinks, Southwest Airlines, getting them on Microsoft Azure, getting them on the cloud for the first time, helped negotiate some of those deals as well. So we can go into some of those interesting large enterprise deals that I worked on then. I eventually went into the help build out the SMC space, which is a new organization which combined the SMB business and the corporate business and created a digital organization before COVID, where people worked out of a office in Las Colinas instead of having geographically distributed reps and reps that were in Fargo for SMB. We combined everything and put it in Las Colinas, and I helped build out that organization. Eventually, I went over to Google to go lead out their inside sales organization. Took over New England at first, then took over the Northeast, then Northeastern Canada. Eventually was a field sales leader over the South Central region, which for Google, for whatever reason, goes from Texas to North Dakota, but that's Google for you. They have their funny quirks about themselves. And eventually I was offered a role to be Chief Revenue Officer over at V1 Health. Originally it was called VMed, and that was a telehealth technology company. Well, still there. And most recently I joined Aspire HR, where I'm the Chief Revenue Officer again. Here we do HCM solutions, so human capital management, HR. We do a lot of work with SAP SuccessFactors. We have our own technology, as well as we have a services practice as well. So working on negotiating deals. Already have negotiated a couple of deals in my 2 months here, which have led to some very interesting insights, some good lessons to be learned, which I'll share with you all if we get into that later on. But hopefully that covers everything. Hopefully it wasn't too long.
No, it was absolutely perfect. I mean, so I guess, after hearing about Google and Microsoft, I can see you're really a fan of the small business, right? I mean, I mean, we typically, Z, like to have, qualified people on here. Google and Microsoft, I don't know. So, no, very, very, very impressive background, sir. What's interesting about it too is that it spans, from those huge corporations to, just out of curiosity, how many, how big is Aspire HR right now?
Yeah, so so V1 when I joined was about 40 employees. By the time I left, it was about 80 employees because we had seen some really good growth. Aspire HR is also under 100 employees right now. It's been around for about 25 years, whereas V1 was more of a startup. So this is, I would say, an established company that feels kind of like a startup. So it has the benefits of both. So I've really enjoyed working at Aspire so far.
Nice. Yeah, my first role out of law enforcement in sales was actually in HCM. So I was with Insperity. Yep. So I know, I remember a little bit of that lingo. Yeah. So I know, I hadn't heard of Aspire, but I do know a bit about that. So the first question that I want to ask, and then I want to also get Matt Getty's input on this too, is whereas you have both sides of the coin, big mega corporations with Google and Microsoft, and now the last few years being in a smaller team, what would you say is really one of the biggest differences from a negotiation standpoint, whether that is planning, internal stakeholders, execution, strategies? What's a couple of the biggest differences?
I think when you're at a smaller organization, I'm sure other people that are listening that are in a similar scenario will feel this as well. You have a lot more freedom, but also a lot more responsibility as well. You are able to basically almost carte blanche decide a lot of different terms of the deal. I'm actually responsible both at V1 and here for all red lines. We had obviously a legal team, and that's what you get for having a law degree. You have to use it.
Everybody wants everything from you. One-stop shop.
Yeah. So no, but Google and Microsoft obviously had their own deal desks. They had their own pricing teams. So pricing would have to be approved by certain groups, no matter what level of sales leader you are. You can't just decide, hey, I want to price X product for this. So during a negotiation, you can't really promise everything because you won't be able to deliver on those things. Whereas now, when you're at a small startup or at Aspire, where we have our own technology product, we know the margins, we know everything else, I can truly offer whatever price I want, with some, obviously, with some ideas there. But I mean, I own it. So with that, I would say, though, that is that responsibility part. And, there's a lot more, you are a steward for the company, so you can't just do anything. But at the same time, you have to know negotiations very well at a smaller organization. You have to be ready for anything. And I'll give you guys an example of something that came up recently where, this played out perfectly for me being on the other side of this. So I was brand new to Aspire, and coming in, we were working with one of our partners, and they basically told me to win this deal, they had to find like $10 million of savings. And we were part of the deal. We were one of the partners that was providing some of the solutions. And so they asked us to make a significant cut on our pricing of our technology software on our technology software to help win the deal. And I was new, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what is our margins on our technology product and can we actually sell it. Unfortunately, my sales rep was on vacation at the time, so I couldn't rely on them to tell me one thing or the other. And so I did a margin analysis first, then I went to our CTO, and then I went to our CEO as well. Now, what I had told the person on the call was, hey, I'm going to do my best to give you what you need. And the way that was heard by our partner, which falls on me, is that, yes, I'm going to do exactly what you've asked for. I'm going to give you the exact discount that you're asking for, which is a massive, massive cut.
Yeah.
Now, good news is we did the analysis on the margins, and we're still in good shape. But the bad news is, and this is a lesson in negotiations, especially in a smaller organization where you will have massive responsibility, you have to choose your words very carefully. And I think this is a major negotiations lesson, which I learned, because I literally sent 15 text messages after I was done talking to the CEO, telling exactly what our position was. I called him back 3 times, but the sales rep on the other side heard what he needed to hear. And so they decided to go ahead and include the pricing at the, I'm going to do my best to get you what you need price, without listening to anything else I had to say after that or talking to me on the phone after that, because he felt he needed that to win the deal. Now, fast forward a few days afterwards, he sends an email to myself, the CEO, everyone else, says, hey, by the way, he committed to this. We've already put it into the plan. Are you guys going to stand by this, or are you going to make us increase our pricing? What are we going to do? At that point, it was out of our hands. Yeah. Now, good news is 3 days later, we win the deal. Would we have won the deal if we hadn't taken such a massive cut? Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe no. But it's an important lesson in, hey, you have to be very, very careful when you're in a senior leadership position in sales or in negotiations and a smaller organization where, they expect the person to have that ability, and the language really matters. Matt, I don't know if you've had similar experiences there.
Well, the language matters for sure, and especially from your perspective as an attorney, getting that law license used all the time for sure. But Matt Getty, you've got some unique perspective on this, because not only are you yourself a founder and a partner of a small business, right, with 22 people, but you are coaching and teaming up with and doing trainings for both very large Fortune 500 companies, but also teams on the smaller side. So what are your perceptions on negotiations on both sides of the coin?
Yeah, no, I mean, Z hit it perfectly on the head, right? The words we use are absolutely critical, and people will listen for what they want to hear. And one of the things we coach are a lot of our clients on, let's say they're going to go take a price increase, and we try to get into the sales team's heads of, hey, you're going to say, hey, we're taking a price of 7%, versus people tend to go well, we're looking for a price of 7%. Like that fine line when you're negotiating against someone who's very successful, they'll see right through that. They're going to identify that movement. They're going to identify your discomfort in that language, and they're going to take advantage of it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely critical. Yeah, the language we use, and when we negotiate with sophisticated people, they're listening for exactly what you're saying to say, okay, where can I poke? Where can I prod? How do we drive that? And I mean, it just comes down to one of the core aspects of negotiation is, people don't understand how much their words matter. And yeah, I really appreciate you sharing the story, because it just nails it right on the head of how critical what we say is. And that's a big thing with negotiation, right? A lot of people think negotiation's the what. In reality, it's the how, right? It's the how are you delivering? How are you stating? So yeah, absolutely love that story.
Yeah, it's unique too, because, when you think about the big corporations and a negotiation strategy for them versus a team that's a little bit smaller. But for instance, here we have, one of our guests here in Z, who is with, certainly a smaller organization compared to a Google or a Microsoft, but you still got the same level of talent on the other side, right? I mean, so if you're negotiating with Z at Aspire HR, or you're negotiating with Matt Getty at the Maker Group, God help you, then you might have to have the same level of seriousness versus a big corporation. Is that fair to say, Z? Am I on the money there?
Yeah, I think that and this brings up a very interesting point about the incongruence of the two sides on negotiations and how much of a difference that can make. You can tell, Matt, I think Matt was sort of hinting at this, is the level of sophistication that you have from certain people that are involved in the process. And, I think that, to Matt's point, I think this is probably one of the reasons why the Maker Group is around, or is to basically make sure you're continuously sharpening your skills in this area so that you can continue to have that competitive advantage. I would say that, from just even like negotiating contracts with vendors, I'll give you a couple of examples. I just literally right before this call, I was on a call with a vendor. We were negotiating a renewal, and the rest of members of my team hadn't even thought to, hey, let's evaluate other options. I came into the call and said, hey, how do you guys compete against X? How do you guys compete against Y? And they're like, well, we don't even compete against them. I'm like, well, first off, I went on to G2 and I said, what are the top 10 competitors to your company? And the number one and number two are the two names I just mentioned. Then I asked him, hey, what is your pricing right now? He tells me the pricing. The first thing I want to do is I want to calculate it down to what is the per user per month license, instead of just saying, hey, this is the fee. So I calculate it down, and it comes up to a number that's more than 5 times the major market leader in this space. I'm like, how do you guys justify this massive to list price? That's their list price. And I'm like, how do you guys justify that? And so he's like, well, we do more things, this and that, blah, blah, blah. My point is if you're going to lose your credibility when you make statements like, hey, we don't even compete against these folks. Yeah, I can easily go to a company like G2 is very well respected in this area of comparisons of different companies. If you go in there and you're part of a negotiation and you just throw off and say, hey, we don't compete against them, and you don't have a very clear, like they were saying something about specific capabilities that their tool had that the other tool didn't have. But when I looked to and this goes back to negotiations too, was research. You have to do a lot of research if you're going to be successful in a negotiation. I did my research. I wanted to say, hey, before I went into this call, one, I looked at our competitors if we're doing a renewal so I can get the best pricing. Two, I'm going to go in and look at their website. Notice, hey, by the way, we're on their website now as a customer reference. So that's something we should bring up. And then with 3, they've recently been acquired. They've been recently acquired by one of our major competitors. And so we have a lot of stuff that's in there. And they came in and asked us, hey, we're going to give you guys a 12% price increase over our last contract because we normally increase our price by 4% a year. And I'm like, that's crazy. You're already way more expensive than everyone else. You're going to have to go back and sharpen your pencil. Gave them the option of lowering the number of users. But the point of all of this is, and going back to your earlier question, Matt, is, there is a difference in the two sides. And you could tell, because we were able to research, we're probably going to come to a better outcome than if we hadn't done the research work and didn't come in with the same level of sophistication into that negotiation.
Well, one important point that you're bringing up there too, and we talk about it all the time, not only on this podcast, but what's baked into our DNA here at the Maker Group is about being honest and respectful with people, right? I mean, these are the ways that you build long-term relationships. And so, right, to your point, when we hear, well, nobody competes with us, I feel like that's probably just not true with any company anywhere. I mean, if you have no competition, you probably are in the wrong business, right? You shouldn't be there anyway. So I love what you said about that, how let's show some integrity, let's show some authenticity, let's not insult other people's intelligence like they're not just going to go do research, right? So with that being said, Matt Getty, that's something that, obviously Matt Getty as my boss and one of the founders, I hear that a lot about making sure that we're setting up the foundations for a long-term relationship. And so Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we strongly believe it's 90% of a negotiation comes down to planning and preparation, right? It's the research, it's the understanding of what's important to the other party, it's the understanding of our priorities, getting our team comfortable with that, driving that internal alignment. And Z, one of the questions I want to make sure we ask is, what's the internal alignment like out of Google, out of Microsoft when you're leading sales? What does that process look like to get that team aligned to then actually go execute that negotiation? Because now, I mean, as a CRO, more of an SMB type of organization, you are the internal alignment. But at a larger organization like the juggernaut Google or Microsoft, what's that like?
Great question.
Yeah, great question, Matt. So it's interesting. It differs by deal. Now they're in, because it's a company of this such size, it's hard to scale out. Like, you can't access your president of Google for every single deal that you're negotiating. But there are certain deals where the president of Google will want to be involved. So the question comes down to, hey, like, we are given bands basically that say, you have empowerment from this percentage to this percentage, and you can do these types of incentives. Like for Google, it was like, hey, you can throw in credits. Everyone knew the formula because it was slides for everything that said, hey, based off whatever they're committing to, we can do this, we can do that. And then you knew there was different types of strategies that you could utilize by leveraging partners, for example. Like, you put on partner paper instead of Google's paper, and then partners would have their own margins. They could play around with that. They can provide some additional capabilities. And sometimes you could combine, say, hey, we're going to put on partner paper, and we're also going to use this empowerment bucket that we have here, which is like cloud credits. And then we can also put some discounts on some SKUs that we can do as well, but SKU level discount. But the point is, like, there was definitely some sales leaders that added more value to the negotiation than others because they knew more about all of the levers that were available. And what I will tell you is, when it comes to sports, when it comes to a game that we're playing, when it comes to anything, I try to learn all the rules. If you know all the rules, you can take things to your advantage. And I try to be very strategic going there. No matter what it is, I want to know everything that I can do. So for my team, they knew all the enablement. We were able to, one of the things where this came into play was, we had this 8-figure deal, high 8-figure deal at Google Cloud, where basically they had already said, hey, we're going to go with AWS, and it was a lost deal. And I said, hold on. This is Mr. CTO. Hold on. Let me see what I can do to buy your business. I want to buy. That was in the terminology that was used during this very critical call, where basically they had said, hey, we're going with your competitor, game over, it's finished. I said, no, we're not ready to give up yet. Give us a few minutes. Let us come back with something else. And so then we went back. We went with our partners, and we just went to the extreme. Like, what is the most extreme discounting we can get? I called up the pricing desk. We added this new contract provision that I had learned about that most people didn't even know about at Google Cloud, which allows certain startups to get out of the, it's basically like an early termination clause in case of the company being acquired. So there was all these clauses that we brought in. We found new buckets. We called the pricing team. I had the pricing guy's phone number. I had his cell phone number, whereas not everyone is going to call him and he's going to answer the phone. He answered the phone, and I got on the phone with him. I got with our partner. Partner gave the maximum margin they could, because this was a major partner for us. And this is the first time they were ever going to get a deal of this size. So they were willing to go all the way on their margin. And so we came back within an hour, and the CTO was like, okay, let's talk. And so
awesome.
if numbers can make sense and you can go into all the details, we'll consider it. And then over the weekend, it was me, my customer engineering manager, my account rep. We literally, and our partner manager, we literally spent hours putting together a new deal, a new package, all the details, a transition plan, a strategy for all their cloud credits. what they would pay by each specific SKU, and we presented that to them on Monday. And then funny thing is, this is a really funny thing about this negotiation, is that we won the deal, which was, I mean, I wouldn't tell you the story if we lost.
The story actually, the story could have been equally as funny if you had lost it, but go ahead.
Well, maybe, I don't know. But we won the deal. And then we find out that the day that they told us we won, AWS found out what we had offered them and actually came lower than what was.
Wow.
But
okay.
The CTO saw the way we were committed to the partnership, the way that we went above and beyond by, just, showing that we want to do everything we could do to win the deal and make them successful. The willingness that we did to work the weekend and do everything we could to throw in every single piece of enablement we could throw into it. Because of that, he said that, because we didn't learn this directly. We learned this from our partner, because our partner, actually, interestingly enough, was a partner for both AWS and Google. So he would have won either way, but he wanted to get into the Google business as well. But
that weekend, your partner was feeling pretty good. He was a win-win.
So basically, at that point, we were like, wow, we won this deal, even though AWS came down lower in price. And this is a common theme, is AWS is, if you're in the cloud industry, I'm sure some of the folks on here are on that. They know that AWS gets pretty aggressive when it comes to price. So there are other ways to win, and part of that is the ability to show your partner that you're all in. And so at these bigger organizations, you have to work through different groups, but the way that you're successful, because obviously you don't have complete enablement, is that you learn all the rules and you learn everything that's, at your disposal to help you win a deal. And if you have that, it helps you win. So after we won that deal, I actually passed on a lot of those learnings through myself, as well as my FSR. We passed off those field sales rep, my rep. We were able to pass along that information to others. And that same half where we closed that deal, I helped my old Canada boss, who I worked with when I was an inside sales leader, win a similar 8-figure deal with the same partner, using the same enablement that we did. And it was another win for us as well. So it just goes to show, having that knowledge and insights in large organizations of what you can do, and then having the right phone numbers, like the person on the pricing desk, and becoming his friend, that made a difference.
No, I mean, it sounds like you're super processed. Matt. No, there's one thing you hit on that I think was also really, really important to the stories. You asked the question, right? How can we win this business? And that's, in negotiation, one of the things we always talk about is under what condition can we get this? And and that's the thing, is anything in negotiation is possible. It's all about trade-offs, but it's too oftentimes people aren't asking the right questions. And that question right there that you mentioned is super, super impactful. And it's what we try to teach people, is have your questioning playbook, right? And it's everything is possible, but you've got to poke, you've got to prod, you've got to be confident to ask that question versus just take a defeat. So absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I just was going to say, I want to draw attention to, a couple of things that it sounds like made that deal possible for Z in that situation. First off, it was the research, right? Wanting to put in that extra amount of effort to see what's possible. Secondly, there had to be a lot of collaboration and alignment amongst your internal team, right? So talking about building those internal relationships and everybody being on the same page, everybody kind of having the same focus. So we talk about those as being critical parts of it as well. And Matt Giddy, I wanted to ask you for a second, talking about this process in terms of the pre-planning, the execution, and also the recording the facts of the deal after, in terms of escalation strategy, who negotiated, what was negotiated. Can you talk a minute about Maker Connect, the tool that you have in order to get some of those facts out on the table?
Yeah, the past 3 years, right, we developed the world, we call it negotiation management system, right? It's a negotiation software that helps basically strategize, plan, prepare, and then track. And basically the emphasis is we would talk to sales leaders, and see, I got to give you kudos, because you're a very process and planned individual, and that's, I think, why your teams have been so successful. But most sales leaders are not, right? They're kind of like run and gun, shoot from the hip. We'll figure it out as we go. And we would talk to these CROs or these VPs of sales, and I say, hey, look back to last year. Tell me about the most successful negotiation you had and break it down for me, right? How did it go? What were the terms negotiated? What was the escalation, the alignment strategy? How are you scorecarding the success and the implementation of it? And then it's just kind of look at you like, I think that information's somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, there's an opportunity here to help drive that process. And it's a discipline, right? It's a discipline. It's simple, but it's not easy because it takes time. And it's absolutely critical that organizations adopt and utilize that time. And yeah, it's a year testament to its success. When you do the time, when you have all the rules, when you understand everything that's at play, it just opens up a massive amount of options.
Yeah, and I think whatever strategy the team chooses to use, there has to be what Z engaged in is that alignment and everybody kind of on the same page. So that was a great example of that. Z, I given your varied background of different roles and sales and all the different things that you've done, I'm especially, working as an attorney as well, I'm really fascinated to hear your thoughts on this. So negotiations as either or both an art and a science. If we think about those two schools of thought, which do you feel a little bit more aligned with at any level of negotiation, any example you want to use? Is it more of an art, more of a science, or some version of both?
It's funny you say this because someone asked me if sales was an art or a science the other day, and I had to come up with a LinkedIn post about that I posted, I think, the week before. And so, because it made me really think about it. But I think that negotiation, I landed on both. I think it's both. And I think that it's funny because I think it was it Donald Trump who wrote the book Art of the Deal, or am I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so
Yep.
He's obviously a strong negotiator, regardless of how you feel about him as an individual or a politician. You cannot deny the fact that he's a very strong negotiator. And I think that it's interesting because there are elements of both in it, and Matt sort of just highlighted it, is your tool basically shows you the science of it. There is a science that needs to be learned and mastered for you to be a successful negotiator. I think that the processes that you can follow, there are steps that you can follow, there are tools like your tool, Matt, that you mentioned that you can utilize that can help you organize the way that you are potentially going to negotiate a deal. So if you set guardrails for your reps, that helps as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you're negotiating deals, if you have guardrails for your entire organization, processes in place, you have things that you can follow. If you have, like when I negotiate a contract, here at Aspire, we have an Excel file with 20 common clauses that we always look at, and we want to make sure that, hey, these clauses have this, this, and this. That's the science of the negotiation. We are making sure that we are doing all the right things from a process perspective. Now, going back to what I was mentioning earlier, the art of the negotiation, like there are certain people and certain, this is something that it's a learned trait. It takes a lot of experience, but it's not something that you can just easily acquire, I would say, but there is an art to it, and it's an art form. I think that some negotiations are simple, like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to negotiate, the funny thing is people don't think of negotiations in everything that you do. Like, just like I think sales is everything that you do. Like, you can go out tomorrow and, when you go to a hotel and you ask for a late checkout, you're negotiating a time right there. That's a negotiation, so people don't know, hey, every time I go to a hotel, I should ask for an upgrade or I should ask for, a late checkout. But that is a negotiation. And there are some people that, the way that they ask, the tone, the way that they look at you, the way they smile, the way that they, control the conversation, the way that they are, almost, you can see there's an art, it's an art form. You're doing certain things that are learned that allow you to negotiate better than someone else. That's why, like, you have agents in professional sports. Like some of these agents, like, remember Drew Rosenhaus used to be the biggest agent that existed back when I really followed sports very closely, and everyone wanted to be with Drew because he just had a way of being able to negotiate the best deals for his clients. There are those folks, that have that gravitas, that ability. Hey, if I'm going to negotiate a deal, I want Matt in the room, because Matt, he knows negotiations and he knows the art form, and he's going to get me the best deal at the end of the day. He's done, obviously, the research, the work, and everything else that goes into it, the science of it is there as well. But I think to truly master negotiations, you have to master the art and the science. My perspective. Matt, I don't know if you agree or disagree.
And just to be clear on Z's statement, we're talking about when you said Matt to be in the room. Everybody wants Matt Getty. Nobody wants Matt Despins in that deal. I promise you, you want Matt Getty. Listen to me.
Could have been either.
Nobody wants me in that room. I promise. We always want Matt Getty. So, Matt, did you have some comments about that?
No, Z's exactly right. You've got your process, but then you've got to have the behaviors, right? You've got to understand and get comfortable with conflict. You've got to understand the art of fairness. You've got to understand asking effective questions, listening for the answer, using the right verbiage, right? It goes back to that language you talk about. All that is the art of it. And it goes back to that statement I made at the beginning. It's negotiation. Yeah, it's about the what, which is the science, but it's much more about the how. And the how is what makes people uncomfortable. The how is where people fall down, because you can be planned and prepared, but if you're not confident in that deal, if you don't feel like you have the power, then you're going to run to the easiest thing possible. Unfortunately, when people get nervous, they become like water. They just trickle down to the easiest deal. And that's where a lot of organizations lose a lot of money. And again, that's why, fortunately, we're employed. If everybody was expert negotiators, we would not have a job. But yeah, I mean, Z hit it right on the head. It's that combination of both. But the art is something that can be learned, but it's got to be focused, and it's got to be trained. And otherwise, most people don't come naturally by it.
Yeah, Matt, you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in negotiations, and you got to be ready to stay silent. Once you make your thing, you got to listen, and you got to be ready to have the other person make the first offer. Like, there's certain things that you just have to feel and you have to have that ability to have a straight face and say something that might sound absurd otherwise. That comes with, I think, the art of it.
Yep.
Z, you just hit on a really big thing there. In every negotiation podcast that we've had, unprompted, people have brought that up. People have talked about teamwork, but they've also talked about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so that seems to be a central theme that's being extracted from these conversations as well. So that must be such a critical part of it. And so, I mean, I'm hearing as I go along that that's definitely a central theme. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on kind of one question to wrap us up here. You have such a vast experience in so many areas of it. What have you seen in people in any negotiation environment typically be the most fearful of headed into a negotiation? And AKA maybe what's their biggest area of improvement? Like, where do you really see folks struggling both in fear and execution?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I'll say about fear first. And fear, I think Matt was mentioning how you can just turn into water. And like, if you're not going in there with the right preparation, you can lose yourself in your fear. I think there's the biggest fear is the fear of the unknown, I would say. I think just generally the fear of the unknown. And the way you combat that fear, obviously, is by researching, learning the other side. Going into negotiation, you're always scared that, hey, am I going to scare the other side away by negotiating? I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law recently got offered a job. She's a physician, and she asked me to look at her contract. And I said, hey, you should ask for this. You should ask for more, essentially, is what I was saying. Mm-hmm. She was afraid. She was afraid to ask for more. And so one of the things that this goes into showing is maybe it's because she's a doctor. Maybe this is why they're, if you look at it, it's well documented that women are paid less than men because women sometimes are afraid to negotiate for themselves and ask for more. I think that fear of, hey, what if they take away my offer? Or what if they walk away from the table, the negotiation table, because I'm trying to negotiate, is always a fear. What if I lose this customer because my initial pricing is too high? Or that, what if it's that fear of the what ifs. And I think you can get lost in those what ifs. And you can also find yourself not really reaching your full potential in that agreement because you are getting lost in those what ifs. And the really best way to deal with that fear and all these fears that you have is to work through them with your manager. whether you're a sales rep or a sales leader. Talk through it with someone else. If it's an important negotiation, go through and game plan it with somebody. Go through all the different areas where there is fears of what's unknown and start to know what's known. And when it comes to execution, I think the other side of the coin is where I've seen people be very good at executing on a negotiation is the folks that are, it just happens to be this way. The folks that are more experienced in negotiations tend to execute better. So this is something that's learned with time. So what does that mean for a junior rep, that's dealing with a small deal maybe, and they're in charge of the whole thing? I mean, I literally can tell you that we have currently inside AEs that we work with at our current company. And there was an example of something that somebody utilized as just a term when she was presenting her product, and they were in sort of the negotiation stage. And she mentioned that, here's our slide that shows all of our solutions. And the funny thing is, they referred to the slide as a spaghetti board or something like something like, if you think of spaghetti,
I've heard that,
something complex, something very, It's not simple. It's all tangled up. It's messy. Well, how would you refer to it that way if it's a very clean and very clear example of your solutions? It was just showing the lack of experience, the lack of sharpening there. And so that he gave that feedback to her. But my point is that he was in the room with her at the same time. And so the way that you combat that lack of ability to execute due to lack of experience is that you bring someone on with you who has more experience. And so, like for myself in this new HCM space, obviously I have a lot of technology experience. I've worked in other fields that are similar, but I haven't sold SAP SuccessFactors in the past. I'm not an SAP expert. I don't know everything about HCM, but I can still rely on other folks that have more experience to bring in so that we don't run into any issues or any confusion during a negotiation. And that's where I think if you want to execute successfully, don't be afraid to ask for help. The last thing I'd say is people are afraid to ask for help during a negotiation, and that can hamstring you. Knowing that you should ask for help and when to ask for help can really help you be successful in any negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fear was a common theme there. Fear to ask for more, fear to ask for help, right? It's always coming back to people just not being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and not leaning into that fear. And Matt Getty, just for one more quick question here, but what's a quick strategy or an overall strategy that you're coaching your clients to get past some of that fear?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it comes down, again, it goes back to just that planning process of what questions you need to ask. I mean, we preach and preach and preach, right? It's about humility. It's don't let your ego get in the way of asking for help. And especially for junior people, it's okay. It's a safe space. And that's where I think company cultures that have a high level of trust are much more successful because people come through. And so that's a lot of that kind of training expertise, working with leaders to say, hey, does your sales team feel like that you have their back? And if so, they're absolutely going to come to you for help. If it's a more cutthroat, dark culture, we'll call it, negative culture,
toxic,
they're not going to go ask for help. Yeah, toxic. And again, I think you can see organizations where they're thriving, and it's because, leaders have established a culture of trust where reps can come in and ask for help, and they've got strong capability development, things like that. And then other cultures that flounder because, there's not a level of trust. So absolutely.
So there's another example of that internal alignment. And then as we finish up here, Z, if you just real quick, for folks who are interested in more about Aspire HR, what are folks going to find if they come and chat with you?
Yeah, no, if people are interested, if you're in the HR space, you want to partner, or if you're looking for someone to help with talent, recruiting, onboarding, anything related to HR, human capital management solutions, would be happy to help with providing you with services, with the technology itself. And so one thing I did want to just highlight real quick, though, before we just wrap this up, is something that Matt just mentioned that reminded me. one of the things that companies should think about, especially when you're dealing with junior reps, is when reps make mistakes, because one of the things is people are afraid to make mistakes. That's another thing that hurts during a negotiation. If you build a culture where people are okay with making a mistake, if they follow the process, obviously, but they're okay with making mistakes and then learning from those mistakes. There's a book by Jack Welch where he talks about his career. He's the former CEO of GE, very well known, very top CEO, someone that a lot of folks admire. He talks about a story where he walks into the office of his supervisor. He has just lost the company, I think, $1 million or something on some deal, and he's completely expecting to get fired. And I don't remember the exact dollar amount in this story, but when his manager talks to him, he's like, "Okay, well, I understand you have to fire me, blah blah blah." He's like, "Wait, I'm not trying to fire you. We just invested $1 million in you, and why would we want to fire you? We expect you to learn from this. No, it's funny to hear this, but in reality, if you have the right culture, and so someone messes up a negotiation, so like going back to my earlier story, like we still won our deal, where I used the wrong terminology, which I should know at this stage of my career, but it at the end of the day, we still won the deal. And yes, it was an investment of a few $100,000 or however much maybe we would have potentially gotten otherwise, but it didn't kill us at the end of the day. And so think of it as an investment is what I would say to other folks as you look at negotiations.
I love it.
Amazing advice, great advice. And it also goes back to that central theme as well about relationships, not only with the people you're negotiating with, but keeping the internal teams aligned and feeling like they're not afraid to make mistakes and having a level of humanity and humility where people feel safe to make those mistakes. Is that right?
Absolutely. You have to have a safe space, chance for people to grow, a chance for people to learn, and fail fast is what they say.
Fail fast and have those be considered as investments. I love that theory. Well, that's going to wrap us up today. Again, this is Zishan Hafiz with Inspire HR. And thanks so much for hanging out and listening. And thanks to Matt Getty, too, for joining us.